Prashant, as we focus on these visuals here, the fact is that in the run-up to this, this visit by the Prime Minister, there were hectic parleys, hectic negotiations. The importance being given to deliverables in this visit was the fact that top officials from America were here just before Prime Minister flew out, a week or two before he flew out to America.
Well, yes, ahead of the visit, there were several visits as well. In fact, we saw the visit of the US NSA to Delhi. We also saw the visit of the US Defense Secretary to Delhi. Both the visit this month. We saw the US Commerce Secretary visiting India, and of course playing holy with the Indian defense minister's visual, which are still recalled. We also saw visits from the Indian side, including by the Indian Foreign Secretary Vinay Mohan Kwatra as well to Washington. And that of course shows that how both bureaucracies are essentially engaging with each other on a regular basis. The ministerial level engagement also taking place on a regular basis. And the message from both sides is that as this engagement increases, it has a wider impact in the relationship. Also, the hesitations are being dropped, the trusts are being built, and both sides are keen to become each other's technologically trusted partner. This is something that has been emphasized during the visit of the US NSA. He in fact standing alongside the Indian NSA Ajit Doval in Delhi just last week talked about how there should be removal of barriers in terms of transfer of technology, and US sees essentially India as an important partner in the Indo-Pacific, where of course there is a very aggressive China which has been involved in border dispute with India. Galwan incident is seen as essentially the 9/11 for India, and since then relationship between India and China have gone southwards. China has been aggressive with Japan when it comes to Senkaku Islands in the South China Sea. It's a story that we all know. So essentially, at a time when China has been aggressive with the country in the region, the relationship with New Delhi and Washington is something that defines the wider partnership between the two countries and defines the global geopolitics as well. What is interesting to note is that this is the week in which the Indian Prime Minister is here in United States, but just before that we saw the crucial visit of the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken to Beijing. He met with the political leadership, hoping that there can be some kind of semblance in the relationship instead of a free fall, which we have seen. But it looks like that the US and China relationship are expected to be in some kind of problematic situation for pretty long time. It looks like there is more commotion here as more and more people come to click pictures of the Yoga Day celebrations at the UN headquarters. But coming back to India-US relationship, this is a relationship that will define this century. Many were optimistic about India-China relationship, but it is highly unlikely. It looks like China is keen to dominate Asia and the world, and it is getting strong resistance, especially with India, US, Australia and Japan coming under the Quad rubric. We know that India is going to host the Quad Summit next year, and for that US President will be traveling to India. In fact, this year there will be a visit by the US President Joe Biden as well for the G20 Summit that takes place in September. So a lot of high-level visits from US which culminate into the visit of the top leadership, that is President Biden.
Yes, absolutely. And going back to the point about the US Secretary of State being in China, America continues to say that India is not being seen as a counterbalance to China, but obviously, the steps that are being taken by America would suggest otherwise. The relationship between China and the US has, of course, remained in suspended animation for a long time. The talks have been in a stalemate. The only factor that's changed in the last week is that they are now talking. I just want to point out to a statement that was made by the strategic communication head in the United States, John Kirby, who said, "We're hosting India on an official visit to put our cooperation on an inexorable trajectory to support India's emergence as a great power." So Siddhant, while the two sides of course continue to say that this relationship is a relationship that has no other element, the bifurcation of that is not, the angle is not China or Russia. Both sides say that, but obviously those are factors that come into play when these two sides talk.
Well, yes, China is a factor in almost every relation in the world, whether it's Pacific, whether it's United States. And of course, India and US have their own set of relationship hinged on several pillars, whether it's people-to-people relationship, the number of Indian students here in United States, whether it is security, trade, economics, whether it is the reforms of the United Nations Security Council as well, because it looks like that even the US is now keen on a massive reform of the United Nations Security Council, especially since the Russia-Ukraine conflict broke last year. Now, if we take a look at the US and China relationship, it is a very complicated relationship. This is a relationship which it looks like from outward that the Americans are keen to improve with the visit of the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. But can the world trust China is the big question. Everyone has its own set of negotiations with the Chinese. The Indians have it, the Bhutanese have it, the Americans have it. But there is one common line or perhaps emphasis on is that while the other side talks with the Chinese, the outcome is same. What the Chinese have to do, they essentially do. We know that India is involved in a long border conversation with the Chinese. It happens almost on a monthly basis now. We get a readout which looks almost similar as the previous readout is, and we actually don't see any movement on the ground. So it is difficult to trust China, and that is why there is a focus from the global community, especially like-minded countries like India and the United States, to work together in almost every sector, in almost every way possible, I would like to put like that, whether it's IPEF or whether it's the Quad. Quad looks like a grouping that is emerging and has a lot of future in terms of humanitarian support in the region. Vaccines was an example of that. Of course, the Chinese have been dubbing it as the Asian NATO, which has been dismissed by all the sides.
Right, Siddhant, thanks very much indeed for joining us with the very latest. We just want to circle back to what's happening right now in New York. Well, these are visuals, of course, of the Yoga Day celebrations being led by Prime Minister Modi in New York at the UN headquarters. And this is continued live coverage that we're getting you for the next 2 days from the United States, Prime Minister Modi's state visit. It's a packed schedule. We'll be getting you all the very highlights of that. And of course, today's big story is in fact the hard benefits of soft power that are on display there at the United Nations headquarters. We'll be leaving you with those visuals. Back in a few moments with Susan Tehrani on the other side. Stay with us.